the Parthenon sculptures were legitimately acquired by Lord Elgin. It was a straightforward contract. They were purchased just like you would purchase a Titian or a Rembrandt, and there you have it. I very much doubt that the purchase was in any way legal, but it was certainly in many respects under duress. It was made with the occupying Ottoman forces. It was made by a man who was the British ambassador at a time when the Turks wanted British support. Arguably, the agreement, even with the Turkish authorities, was simply to sketch and draw the sculptures, not to forcibly remove them. When they were removed, many of them were damaged. And indeed, the original intention of Lord Elgin, of course, was to display them in his own estate. The only reason they came into the possession of the British Museum was because Lord Elgin went bankrupt, and he also wanted an English peerage. And that is the reason why they ended up in the British Museum by dint of an Act of Parliament. And of course, at the time, it was still highly controversial and wildly debated at the time. It wasn't a unanimous view of the British public at the time that we were right to acquire them. There is also an argument which I find profoundly patronizing, which is still used to this day, which somehow depicts the Greeks as somehow not capable of looking after their own heritage. It's often the point is made that there was an explosion at the Acropolis when the Venetians were storing ammunition there. That happened about 150 years before Lord Elgin acquired the sculptures. And in any event, the sculptures that he so kindly left behind did survive and find themselves in the Acropolis Museum, a state-of-the-art modern museum where they are extremely well cared for. And it's certainly not the case that the British Museum looked after the sculptures when they acquired them. The notorious fraudster and art dealer Duveen, who's after whom the galleries in which the Parthenon sculptures reside is named, had them scrubbed clean, freshly white, in order to be displayed. And in my view, they're not particularly well displayed in any event. And there's certainly no question that the British Museum can be regarded as having been a careful steward of the sculptures they have. We know that the British Museum has been in the news recently because of the theft of many artefacts. I would not run this argument as another argument to return the Parthenon sculptures, but I would say perhaps that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And the argument that somehow the Greeks are not capable of looking after their own heritage, I think, is severely weakened if it's made by a museum that hasn't necessarily shown that it is capable of caring for its own collection. So I'm not going to use that against the British Museum, but equally, I hope that argument will now be properly dropped. Another odd argument that is sometimes used, and was used by David Cameron when he was asked about this, and it's often used by other prime ministers who are always doorstepped about this issue, is that this would be the start of a slippery slope, that somehow all museums would be denuded of their collections. A good comparison would be the V&A, which is very prominent in this issue of restitution, which says it's received 9 restitution claims for its 2.7 million objects that it has in its possession, 9 restitution claims in the last 20 years. But the restitution issue is extremely easy to deal with. You simply set up an independent committee that can give advice to museums, which doesn't need to be binding on any restitution claim that they receive. We do for Nazi art. We have the spoliation committee, which quite rightly looks at the provenance of art that may have been acquired illegally by the Nazis. We have the reviewing committee for the export of works of art, which quite rightly stops objects which are deemed to be inherent to British culture from being exported if a public collection can raise the money to purchase them. And that is also a clinching argument for the Parthenon sculptures. If it's okay for us to set up a committee that recognizes that there are objects in this country which are inherently part of our culture, we must therefore accept the argument that there are some objects in our museum which are inherently tied to the culture of other countries, including nations as friendly as the Greeks.